58% of everyone who comes into our citizens advice is in paid employment. We're getting a lot more people in jobs, management roles, £35,000 a year. So where you are born, for example, can affect your life expectancy by as much as 18 years.
Hello there and welcome to the About Small Business podcast. In this episode, I'm really excited to introduce Alison Dunn from the Society Matters Group, CEO of the Society Matters Group. Alison, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
You're very welcome, Barry. Thanks for inviting me along.
And can I just say thank you very much for allowing me to come and use your services while my own studio is currently in the middle of some renovations, shall we say. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome. If us podcasters can't stick together,
absolutely,
then there's no hope for the world, is there?
That's fantastic. Now, Alison, the Society Matters Group is, as I understand, a CIC, spelled CIC. Yeah. For people who don't know what that means, would you mind just being able to just briefly explain what that?
Yeah, well, the Society Matters Group actually is a brand, and underneath that brand sits three distinct projects, legal entities. So we've got the Citizens Advice Gateshead, which is a charity which your listeners will recognise. I'm sure most people know the Citizens Advice brand.
Yep.
But we are one of the largest citizens advisors in England and Wales. Not the largest, but one of the largest.
Right.
And we provide services locally, regionally and nationally as part of Citizens Advice, which again might be a surprise to people. We also employ around 250 to 265 people, depending on when you take the head count. So again, really large and probably not what most listeners would think of when they think of a Citizens Advice.
I'm going to say that's significant, isn't it?
Then we've got...
Would that be including volunteers?
No, so volunteers in addition to that. Although one of the things that all voluntary sector organisations are experiencing now is a real reduction in the number of people willing or able to volunteer. So post-COVID, a lot of organisations like ours have seen a reduction in volunteering. I think people are worn out. It's a lot harder to volunteer if you are receiving benefits. There's a lot of conditionality attached to the receipt of those benefits, which can make volunteering difficult. But also for Citizens Advice, the threshold for competency to be an advisor is really quite high.
Right.
And there's a lot of work involved in getting that. So that can also make just a little bit harder for us. Right,
certainly. So the CIC itself then?
Yeah, so sorry. Yes, I got distracted there, got carried away.
You've a lot going on with that many staff.
Yeah, so we've got Citizens Advice Gateshead, which is the charity, and then we've got a CIC, which is called the Society Matters CIC, and that is a limited company which has social purpose. So it's not charitable status.
I'm going to say there's a difference, isn't there?
Yeah, and the reason for it is because there are things that we want to do which are important for the organisation's mission that don't necessarily fall within the aims and objectives of the charity. So it just gives us a little bit more flexibility to be able to trade. So charities, for example, have a threshold on how much trading income they can achieve without threatening their charitable status. So the CIC allows us to just be a little bit more creative, but it also allows us to operate beyond the borders of Gateshead, which is really important because we have regional government in the northeast of England.
Yes.
And we want to appeal to regional government, but also we want to work with businesses because 58% of everyone who comes into our Citizens Advice is in paid employment. So that tells us...
Sorry, what percentage was that again?
58%.
58%?
Yeah. Before COVID, it was in the sort of early to mid-30s. So we've seen a real shift.
That is quite a dramatic increase.
So we know that there are people who are working for their poverty. So for us to be able to tackle that, we really need to be able to work with businesses.
Yes.
And so the CIC gives us a platform to do that. And we've actually worked with around 50 businesses of all shapes and sizes across the North East Combined Authority, reaching around 30,000 employees as a result, just helping employers to understand what in-work poverty is like for their workforce, how their workforce is experiencing the cost of living crisis, and how they can change some of their working practices and policies to just make things a little bit easier for the people in their workforces who might be experiencing poverty. Now, again, for your listeners, we're not always talking about people who are necessarily in traditionally really low paid jobs. We're getting a lot more people in jobs, management roles, 35,000 pounds a year, who are still experiencing real hardship because things like fixed rate mortgages, they've
come to an
end, and all of a sudden they've got huge spikes in what was very affordable expenditure.
And so, rents also have gone up sort of commensurately with the mortgage rates. I've seen a number of landlords.
You're absolutely right.
Either, I suppose, having to cover their own costs on the mortgage, or also just wanting to kind of go with the flow and make a bit more.
So it's a much more complicated picture than people might imagine. So within the KIC, we also have a project called Suitability, which is around helping men to get into employment. So men who might have been economically inactive. And you might say, because if you know me and you've been following me on social media, I'm all about the girl power. So you might say to me, Barry, well, why men? But it's actually because we have a great partner in SmartWorks already, and they provide that provision for women who are looking to get back into work or to change their roles. So it's a collaboration with SmartWorks Newcastle, and it's specifically tailored to the male market, recognising that there are some very unique challenges for men right now, which are well documented across, social media. And then the other part of our group is something that we just launched in February, which is the Society Matters Foundation. And that is about how do we influence the policies, the processes, the ways of working through data, research, campaigns and insight, so that when we talk about growth as a society and in the northeast of England, we're talking about inclusive growth. Because if we just have growth for the sake of growth and rich people continue to get richer and poor people continue to get poorer, then on paper we've achieved our growth target, but actually we've left a lot of people behind. So the Society Matters Foundation is very much about encouraging inclusive growth that brings everybody on the journey.
Commendable goal. That must be, though, by its nature, quite a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And, we are in a geopolitical environment right now, which is really, really toxic. And, some of the things that are, our fundamental beliefs are being really sort of challenged and pushed back against, particularly things around EDI, which is equality, diversity and inclusion, for those that might not be familiar with that term, women's issues, that there's a lot of pushback on that stuff. But actually, we know that a more equal society is a society that's better for everyone. When we have equality, there's less crime, there's less domestic violence, educational attainment is increased, income is increased at a household level. So it's better for everyone when we have a more equal society.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm an ally as far as that perspective is concerned. You've kind of alluded to it already. I'd hate to argue about the majorities and minorities at the minute, but fundamentally, I think we can agree that there would be a lot of people who don't like the perhaps some of the sort of the diversity, that kind of thing. So in Durham, where the council, they've been talking about getting rid of pride. We're seeing lots of toxic comments about all minorities at the minute. How's that affecting you?
Yeah, well, for a long time in this country, we've been pursuing this neoliberal agenda, which is that, personal responsibility for where we find ourselves. So if something goes wrong in our lives, it's because we haven't done something, or we've fallen short, or, it's our behaviour that's got us in that place. Yeah. And there is a growing number of people who believe that to be true. I'm not one of them, actually. The way that society chooses to conduct itself ultimately brings people to a place of success or not. So where you are born, for example, can affect your life expectancy by as much as 18 years. So you cannot choose where you are born, okay? Of that we can agree. So if you're born in a poor area, your life chances will be significantly reduced. So in the borough where I work, Gateshead, there is an 18-year disparity between people that are born in our wealthiest ward and those that are born in our poorest ward.
So sorry, just so I've heard that correctly, you've talked about an 18-year disparity in lifespans. That I don't find particularly surprising. What I do find surprising is the fact that that's just in one borough.
In one borough. And we're talking about a couple of miles between these two places.
That really is staggering, isn't it?
So when we talk about, people pushing back against these neoliberal ideas, pushing back against neoliberalism, the idea that you are in control of your own destiny, and if you don't achieve great financial success, it's because somehow you are at a deficit. It's all of the evidence says that that's just simply not the case. I can give you another example that people might be able to relate to. So we are finding out now that obesity doesn't exist simply because people eat too much.
I remember listening to this on a radio station the other day.
Yeah.
And the presenter, who was rather overweight himself, was having a really hard time with that.
Yeah. So it exists because there are global commercial forces operating in this world that are constantly nudging us towards food, and I would dispute whether it is food, that is not good for us. Absolutely. That is actually changing the physiology of our bodies and our brains in a way that is causing us to store this stuff and leading to what is now an epidemic of obesity. Now, of course, for some people it will be that, but obesity as a condition is far, far more complex, and it's not always down to the individual control of a person. It exists within a system of ultra-processed food, of mental, illness, of a whole range of stuff. So your life chances are dictated very much by the environment within which you exist. And very little of it is actually down to the choices that we overtly make. I
think it's like if you take that in its extreme, and if we, for example, talk about the life chances of a woman living in Afghanistan, born in Afghanistan, that lady can't dynamically grab her life chances and suddenly turn things around and become multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a particularly controversial thing to say. And so in its extremes in terms of where we're born affecting our future, I think I would struggle to imagine many people disagreeing with that, but within a 2-mile radius, that is quite shocking.
Yeah.
And it also surprises me because what you're saying about the food industry and how we're pushed towards certain foods, I don't even think that's particularly controversial. I would imagine that a lot of the same people who would be happy to accept that, in a number of cases, would be the same people that are then turning around and wagging fingers.
Yeah, I mean, I had an exchange with somebody on social media about ultra-processed foods, and despite the fact that there is now a significant body of academic research to support what I'm saying today, there was no turning that person. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have with the public discourse that we have right now, that it's become a very, very divisive environment. And
incredibly so.
Yeah, and we seem unable now to be able to moot concepts, ideas, philosophies, ideologies without taking really extreme, aggressive, radical positions. Evidence doesn't seem to matter anymore. It
seems to matter more about who's telling you.
Yeah.
And, or the platform that it comes from. I mean, one of the key questions, for myself, I'm an English graduate, former English teacher. One of the key things is you look at the source, where information has come from. What source is that? Has that person who's provided that source researched that? Is there any underlying agenda?
People don't accept that anymore. So I had an exchange recently, just in the last week actually, around food insecurity. And the number of males, and I'm sorry it is males, and they are almost exclusively white, 40 plus, who were mechanics, site engineers, asset managers, plumbers, builders, financial advisors, who profess to know more about the issue, the topic of food insecurity, poverty and inequality than me, who is a former lawyer, the CEO of a charity that deals with poverty, inequality and disadvantage, was enormous.
What strikes me about that is, I mean, initially when you first started talking about tradespeople, it's like, is that fair? Are we maybe sort of but then you start to look at asset managers. I mean, that's fair, but I think, in amongst the professions that you're talking about, there's quite a varied bunch. And I have to say, as a white male, quite a bit over the age of 40, to be fair, yes, I'm perfectly well aware that a lot of my peers are looking to those alternate views of or perspectives, and it's difficult as one of those, as someone who fits into that sort of demographic. It fascinates me and puzzles me at the same time. As to why that is.
The sort of the followership without evidence and the truth just doesn't seem to matter anymore.
We know, you've not got where you are without some sales experience. Yeah. And we all know that people like to believe what they want to hear. Yeah. I remember when I was working at school, I'd demonstrate that by telling a class that mobile phones were beneficial to your academic progress. Now, there may be studies that support that, there may not be. The point being is that I had made that up.
Yeah.
But when you explain that to a group of teenagers, all of a sudden, the glee in the faces, or certainly at the time that I was telling these kids that was the case, they wanted to believe that. Right, that's brilliant. And there were some kids who, having told that, I couldn't then take it, so I had to stop using that as an example. Yeah. Because some kids were, no, Mr. No, there is this, and I checked, and there is, and then we come to that situation where people are looking for the evidence that they want.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've gone back to university recently to do a master's in public health.
Right.
After not being in a classroom for a very long time, and I've had to revisit all of my critical thinking skills. And one of the tips that they gave me as I re-entered into the academic world was, firstly, do not believe everything that you read. And secondly, ask who stands to benefit from what you're being told.
Yeah.
And they're two really easy things to do. And thirdly, expose yourself to alternative views. So I totally get why people are feeling disenfranchised from the world right now, and why they are looking to alternative ideologies for relief, and why they feel that that's the answer. But you can't close your mind to the body of evidence which tells us that neoliberalism just simply isn't working for us anymore.
It's one of these things. Our society is based on a board game, or rather, the board game is based on our society. So we've got a society that has managed to influence the manufacturing of a board game called Monopoly. Now, if you play that game for too long, the longer that you play it, the more players find themselves unable to continue.
Yeah, yes, actually I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right.
And it's interesting because I feel that we've actually, at this point in time, we've lost quite a large number of players. Mm-hmm. And I think we can't discount the concept of personal accountability. For me personally, I'm quite fortunate because the amount of sweets and things that I eat, I should literally be twice the size I am. I've got a sweet, but I'm lucky insofar as my build, my genetics don't seem to mean I'm clinically obese, or that mean I don't look obese. I might be carrying a bit extra, but I don't believe I look absolutely obese. I do go to the gym fairly regularly, but I think, I've interviewed enough gym owners to know that you can't out-train a bad diet.
But Barry, that in itself demonstrates a level of privilege that you have that others perhaps don't. Because actually, I was just reflecting with a friend of mine recently on the amount of money that I spend on staying well. So you've got a gym membership that's a commercial arrangement that you're paying for. But if you are living a life of destitution or poverty, you absolutely don't have access to that gym membership. Now you can say, well, you can go and pound the streets, but you know, it's much harder than people perhaps
depending on where you live as well, that may not be an option.
And the amount of privilege that we have. So, you know, I grew up a child of the 70s. Hard to believe, Barry, I know, but it's true. And I had everything that I needed, but not necessarily everything that I wanted.
Yes.
Because that's how it was in the 70s. But I had a loving home. I don't remember ever having any worries about where meal would come from, although there was no sort of snacking or abundance of food outside of meals. But again, I do think that was just the times, you know, and the sort of the access to sort of processed foods wasn't there at that time. So if you didn't cook it, you didn't get it. So I had a roof over my head. I had parents that are still married and very much, you know, loving of one another to this day. I never worried about food. I had books in my house. Now we know that when you don't have books in your house, that you are at an immediate disadvantage. So 1 in 8 children don't have books in their homes. By the time
I imagine that's gonna numbers gonna.
But what's the consequence of that? By the time they get to school, their peers who have had books are 15 times ahead of them. So they're starting life at a disadvantage. So one of my frustrations is that, you know, I hear a lot of people saying, well, I've just worked hard and I've turned my life around. All you need to do is work hard. That's just not true.
People get incredibly cross when that's challenged. Incredibly cross when that's challenged. And it's now, you've experienced a degree of success. I would tentatively say that you wouldn't have been able to get where you've got without hard work.
Well, I think that that is true, but actually much, much more has happened than just my hard work.
I think that's a crucial thing.
So it's
correlation versus causation, isn't it? It's like you need hard work and it's a key ingredient. You know, let's be honest, it is a key ingredient, but it's not. Working hard isn't going to guarantee
it's not.
You becoming a billionaire.
We see people all of the time here who are working incredibly hard, often holding down 3 part-time jobs. So if that's not hard work, tell me what is, because you've got 3 employers, 3 sets of terms and conditions, 3 lots of competing demands on you, 3 different lots of things that you have to deliver. Every time you want a holiday, you've got to ask 3 employers for time off. You're subject to 3 different lots of terms and conditions. Now, if that's not hard work, I don't know what is.
Often a lot of these people have kids as well that they're managing. I mean, I've been made aware of parents who are kind of tag teaming. They never see each other because one will be working during the day, one will work at night, so they're both on minimum wage jobs so they can manage the kids. I remember as a teacher chatting to a young lad. Now, I mean, teachers, certainly now, in my opinion, work harder than they did when I was teaching. And I put the shifts in. Anyone that's worked with me, I think, would acknowledge that. But as a teacher, I remember chatting to a young lad in my class, and he was telling me about his mother that was working 3 jobs as a single parent. Now, I'm myself and my wife are still together. I can't imagine being a single parent and working, let alone having 3 jobs. And I was earning as a teacher more than this lady was earning from her 3 jobs. It just isn't all about hard work. Yes, you can achieve, you can improve your life by working hard, but you're not guaranteeing those.
No, you're not. And there's an element of luck in all of it. And again, people become very enraged when you suggest to them that their success might have been about luck. But often it is.
I was going to say earlier on when you mentioned privilege and my privilege, I'm aware of my privilege, but it's that thing. So for some people, they really struggle
Yeah.
And it's taken as a personal insult.
It's also about networks. So, one of the things that I've been very fortunate, yes, I have always worked hard, and I have accept that there has been an element of luck. So the very first job that I got was a complete fluke. To this day, I don't know how I got that job. But anyway, so there's an element of luck, but also networks. So one of there's a great book, and it's called, it's written, I've forgotten the name of it, which is probably not helpful. But she was been doing some social experiments around people who are long-term economically inactive, and actually one of the real challenges that they experience is a lack of networks. Now, if I was to fall on hard times, I would put a call out to my network. Nobody's going to give me a job, but what they're immediately going to do is start sharing opportunities with me. They're immediately going to start meeting me for cups of coffee and giving me advice, mentoring, coaching. They're immediately going to be passing my information to other people in their broader networks. And that's another example of my privilege.
The crucial thing about that as well is during COVID that you've already mentioned, that managed to make a lot of people very rich.
Yeah.
Now, and I can accept the argument of the government at the time. There were very strange times. They needed action very, very quickly.
And we default to our networks, what we know, who we know and who we trust.
Yeah, because if I've got some friends, or if someone I know wants someone with your skills, it's like, I know this person. And there may be a number of people who would match the criteria, but if I don't know them, I can't therefore recommend them. And I think that's something, if you don't have those networks, people really struggle to get their heads around. Yeah. And it never ceased to amaze me, the number of people when we were talking about like sort of high level banking careers, and so, well, I'd do that job for that money. It's like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've always benefited from, and this is this is a huge privilege, and it's not something that I have achieved. It's something that's been natural. I've always been a confident and competent chatterer. So I see people who are really struggle with confidence and their ability to put themselves forward. Now, I would love to tell you that I've done loads of personal development in order to have this confidence and this ability to be able to speak to people, whether they are lords or whether they are, sweeping the roads.
Yeah.
But I just love people. I love hearing their stories. I love sharing my experiences with them. And I've always been able to connect with people. But it's not because of anything that I've necessarily learnt or been taught. It's just how I am.
There's
it's a level of privilege.
Well, I was going to call it a talent in a way, because
But I can't draw and I can't dance and I can't sing.
But there you go. But no, I think you're right. I was listening to it's actually a personal trainer, and they were talking about these people who are in immensely good shape, really ripped physiques and everything. And, and it's like, all right, they've worked really hard training, and so they're like that. It's like, well, these people with amazing six-pack, there's genetics are involved. I can train, sort of 7 days a week or however many I'm recommended to train, watch my diet. I'm going to find my personal limit on that. And it's a case of everyone's got the things that they're good at. Everyone's perhaps got the things that maybe not so good at. And your ability to network. It's one of those things. I remember, funny enough, being told in an assembly at school that you couldn't get a GCSE for being social.
Well,
and that your GCSEs were more important. And I just think it's interesting that all these things that we were told at school, like we'll never have a calculator in our pockets, hello mobile phone. And then now, I think now more than ever, and I'm sure you probably agree with that, if you're attributing a lot of your success to that ability to be social and network is probably, well, certainly at this stage of your life, more beneficial to you than any GCSEs you might have got.
Yeah, I think the opportunities that I've been given have come about because of my ability to connect with people rather than my academic prowess. Now, I've used my ability to connect with people to go on and achieve academic success. So, at 16, I got a job as an office junior in a firm of solicitors, and within a very short space of time persuaded them that the right thing to do was to put me through Open University, and I qualified as a solicitor. Now, they did that for me because they believed in me, and we had developed, high levels of trust. And yes, I was hardworking, so there was an element of that, but it was my ability to connect with them that ultimately opened that opportunity. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to get a lot of very formalised learning. But the real sort of, fairy dust is just being able to connect with people at a human level, and to be authentic and honest about who you are and what you stand for. And
Can I ask you then about school? What was school? What did school look like for you? How did you feel going in every day?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of an under the radar sort of child. I wasn't a naughty child, but I wasn't a shining star either. And I was a bit unfortunate in that I got the tail end of CSEs and GCEs, which was neither O-level or GCSE. So as a result, I didn't get any O-levels or GCEs. So I left school with very little academic.
No CSE grade ones?
Possibly, but they were so sort of, they were almost a forgotten qualification before they even got out of the gate, weren't they?
They're funny things, weren't they?
Yeah, so I got a YTS working in a bank.
Right.
Which again was quite a surprising outcome for someone with no qualifications, but for some reason, I met with them, they liked me, I got this YTS.
It's networking skills, you see.
Yeah. And then I was sitting at my desk in the bank one day in the career service, because we had career services back in those days. And this was a very inspiring pep talk. Alison, this is the career service. We've got your details from school. There's a local solicitor's office interviewing today, and somebody's dropped out. Could you go along and make the numbers up? And I said, well, I'm not really dressed for an interview. Don't worry, we've told them. It's just they want 5 people and now they've only got 4. So if you could just pop round at 4 o'clock, that would be great. So being the compliant child that I was, I tappy-lappied around to the solicitor's office and somehow landed myself that job as the office junior. So I went from £27.50 a week YTS.
I forgot now, that was how much it was, wasn't it?
To the grand sum of £45 a week as an office junior in the firm of solicitors.
If just from memory, because you've inadvertently told me how old you are, and it's a very similar age to myself, we're talking about a time when you could go out with a tenner.
Yeah.
And you could have, you could be in double digits for alcoholic pints.
Yeah.
A pizza, maybe even a curry as well at a push.
So that felt like a lot of money to my 16-year-old self. But anyway, what I realised when I got there was that the solicitors that were working in that firm, they were ordinary people. And I'd imagined that they would be all privately educated, perhaps from Cambridge or Eton. And I was furious, Barry. I'm not going to lie.
Really?
It was a physical feeling of rage and frustration.
That you'd kind of been lied to, misled in some way? Or?
None of that was visible to me. None of it was visible. Nobody had ever suggested that that was something that might be in my future. So I had been prepared for a life as a secretary.
What's surprising me about this, I think, is that you, at the time, someone was very young, had the presence of mind to kind of realise that.
Yeah, and it was a very physical feeling. It wasn't just an epiphany, a mental realisation. I remember the feeling of real sort of injustice. So I got that job in the May, and in the September I enrolled in night school, got my GCSEs, got my A-levels, and then persuaded the firm to send me to Open University to qualify as a lawyer. And within probably about 8 years, had gone from having no qualifications other than maybe a couple of CSEs, which nobody will even remember now, and maybe a couple of RSAs in typing, to qualifying as a lawyer and had a reasonable career in the legal profession before leaving in 2005 after I had my third child, because it was just too difficult to have 3 children in a profession that was just literally like wringing me out. And my intention was just to have a year out and then to regroup. But about 6 months in, I started to become a bit restless. So I decided that I would look for a job just for a summer.
Yeah.
And I landed in Citizens Advice 2 days a week as a money advice worker, and really didn't intend to stay here very long. But there was a dropping of the scales from my eyes when I realised that I had spent the last 15 years processing people through a legal system without understanding why somebody might have shoplifted food, why somebody might have been the perpetrator of domestic violence because they themselves had had an adverse childhood experience.
As a society, we really don't like looking at the whys, do we?
Yeah, it was a shocking moment.
We just seem to like goodies and baddies.
Yeah.
And I've thought about this an awful lot myself. It is interesting, this podcast taking a very, very different turn in many ways to what I was expecting.
Yeah, me
but
too.
it is a fascinating conversation, because the whole good guy, bad guy thing, it's like, and I'm sure I was reading something, The Secret Barrister on Twitter, and they were talking about, I can't remember which case it was they were talking, but what they were saying is like the law is complex, and as someone involved in law, you become, they were suggesting that most people become aware that everyone is capable of doing bad things in a certain degree, certain circumstances.
I couldn't agree with you more, Barry. So in the latter sort of years of my legal career, I dealt with people who had been accused of child molestation, of rape, of murder, of grievous bodily harm, significant domestic violence. And actually my engagement with some of those people was, that they could often be very funny, very amusing, very personable, very serious. And what it taught me is that we are not one thing.
No.
People can do very, very bad things and still have really loving relationships in a different part of their life.
It's interesting, isn't it? Some people do seem to be able to compartmentalise.
But I don't think it's some people. I think we're all capable of it if the circumstances are right.
Again, that's something that a lot of people would be really uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's exceptions. When we're talking about paedophilia, that's something quite different. But we're all, I think, there is an element of in us all.
Yeah.
We're not one thing.
I think it's the same sort of mindset that prevents us from having any kind of sensible discussion about crimes as serious as paedophilia. I think the majority of us, overwhelming majority of us, would all agree that it's wrong. But it's a really complex situation to try to solve that as a problem as a society.
Or sexual crime.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the point that I came to Citizens Advice and the scales dropped from my eyes, that many of the socio-economic circumstances that I had been processing as a lawyer were far more complex than that had ever been revealed to me before. So at that point there was no going back to legal practice, because politically I'd changed, morally I'd changed, socially I'd changed, everything in my world changed when I arrived at Citizens Advice. So I'd been a really, really driven, ambitious, typical sort of 90s stereotype of that woman that, with the power suit, wanting everything, great car, great house, great husband, great kids, fantastic holidays, power suit, the lot. And then realised, and I wasn't unhappy when I was doing it, but having climbed over the fence and saw the consequences of it and some of the drivers that had driven people to the choices that they'd made, there was no going back to that.
Right.
It was it was another one of those moments where I was reprogrammed. So if we go back to my 16-year-old self, a realisation that there was this life that wasn't available to me, and a direction of travel, but then another pit stop, going through another door, and a realisation that wasn't visible to me, and a reprogramming in another direction. And that's when the second half of my career started in the voluntary sector. So those 2 days a week in Citizens Advice, which was only supposed to be for one summer, ended up being 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, supervisor, manager, contract manager, CEO within 5 years.
That's some pace to be going at that for a start. Do you think you'd have been able to do that but for your experience in the legal profession?
No. It was quite a unique, and also the organisation at the time had some really significant financial challenges. So my first day in the job, I had a High Court bailiff in reception. But thankfully, the last gig I'd had as a lawyer was in an insolvency practice actually.
Right.
So I had nerves of steel at that moment and wasn't at all perturbed by the appearance of this High Court bailiff. So I had a particular skill set at the time, which is absolutely what got me the job. It wasn't that I was a great CEO, I just had that particular experience, which is what we needed at the time.
Yeah.
But I've learned how to be a good CEO of a charity, I'm pleased to report. And, I've grown the organisation from 800,000, where we were, to over 7 million, from 30 staff to about, 250, 265, depending on when you do the head count.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are impressive numbers. And so basically that's a build-up of all your experiences managing to take the business and do that, or the charity and do that.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to call it a charity? Or?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Quite phenomenal, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's been my life's work, but it's a cliche to say find something that you love and you'll never feel like you've worked a day in your life. But I'm going to use that cliche because I absolutely love what I do.
I like to think that is kind of what this podcast's about. It's about people who are living the passions, living the dreams. And in many ways, perhaps if you were a solicitor, you might be looking forward to retiring early due to a high level of success financially.
Yeah.
But it's coming across to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that retirement isn't really even on the radar.
Well, whenever I talk to my husband about retirement, he'll say, Alison, the only person who doesn't know that is a terrible idea is you. The rest of us are terrified at the thought of you wandering around this house with nothing to do. So I think that you're probably right. But there's different ways of working, isn't there?
There is, absolutely. I think retirement is it's changing.
Yeah.
The concept of retirement itself is changing. I think it's no longer we'll just because you'd mentioned about the number of volunteers diminishing, and I was chatting because I actually sort of volunteer on the committee in my local community centre. Right. And I was chatting to our chairman, and our chairman she's currently the chairman and the treasurer, and is from a corporate background, very capable, formidable person who's done absolute wonders for the centre. She got all the repairs done, kept it ship shape. She doesn't suffer fools. Yeah. Very blunt in her talking, but that's through her set of skills has enabled her to get that centre solvent and functioning and doing pretty well. Yeah. But she was saying to me, she's having to take those two jobs because we're struggling to get volunteers. Mm-hmm. Because this is interesting, and it links into the retirement idea, because a lot of people are now retiring to help provide childcare for grandchildren.
Or they're going into part-time work just to keep their hand in something as well. That's the other thing.
And I mean, with the cost of living going up, it's like most people, when they stop their main source of income, are going to have to make some kind of compromise. Yeah. And then when the cost of living goes up as it has done in recent years, then you do need to look at other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, purpose-driven activity, having something that I'm passionate about is really important. And as I've described on my journey, that purpose has been different at different points in my life, but the fire's been the same. And I suppose if we reflect back on our earlier conversation about the ability to think critically, I've been very fortunate to see the world through different lenses, and to receive that gift and to recalibrate and go again. Yeah. And I don't know what the next chapter is going to be for me. There might be another pivot on the road. Who knows? As I say, I'm doing this Masters in Public Health, which is absolutely related to what we're doing here. But that need for purposeful work as opposed to just work is something that's really important. We have a trustee of our charity, a wonderful lady called Liz Reid. Shout out to Liz, but she always says that she's never enjoyed working so much since she started doing it for free.
Yeah.
So she's retired and she gives her time to lots of different passions that she has, and is probably working just as hard as she was when she was in paid employment.
Yeah.
But she's absolutely formidable and says, you know, that the day that she started working for free was the day that she met her true potential.
It's true that it's that sense of purpose. I mean, we need money to provide security, to feed, put a roof over our heads. We need the money for that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I know certainly Stephen Bartlett on the from the Diary of the CEO, he's made perfectly clear. He speaks to some of the wealthiest people in the world, and I've heard this from other people as well who've actually sort of associated with that sort of person. You know, these mega wealthy people. And that's that they don't come across as terribly happy. They're still seeming sort of quite unfulfilled in many ways. If you're enjoying this content, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to let you know exactly when another podcast's going to drop.
So I had the privilege recently to attend a lecture by a guy called Guy Standing, who is a world-renowned expert on a principle called universal basic income, and we don't have the time to talk about that today. It's a podcast in its own right, but Guy has worked for organisations like the World Health Organization. He's advised governments all across the world, and he was saying that, you know, we are at a crucial point in the development of our society, and how we value success really does define the sort of the political direction of travel, this sort of push that we're having towards the right. But actually, you know, growth for the sake of growth is not beneficial to the world, to society. And this obsession that we have with jobs is also not entirely helpful, because there are all sorts of things that we do as people, as humans, as a sort of a functioning society outside of paid work that is valuable.
Yeah.
So if we think about the unpaid labour that happens in the home, which is still exclusively done by, predominantly done by women, but not exclusively. If we think about the premium that is paid by women for taking a break to have children, often their careers never recover from that. If we think about the obligation to support elderly parents, again, predominantly a burden taken by women, but not exclusively, that has huge value to society. If the government had to pick up the cost of that,
it'd be running into
but we don't value it.
No.
If we think about things like repair and recycle, if we think about growing our own food, if we think about staying home to care for our own children, if we think about volunteering, community engagement, all of those things have a value.
Yeah.
And yet the only thing that we value is paid work.
Yeah.
So he was setting out this vision of what an alternative sort of value system could look like and the benefits of that. And it was just absolutely fascinating.
It sounds it. It does sound it. I would love to continue chatting to you because I think we really could go on forever.
We could.
But it has been an absolute pleasure, Alison, having you on. Loving the sound of the work that you do. Love your journey. And I can just wish you all the best.
Barry, thank you very much. So much.
Cheers.